Subscribe to Chaos Banshee or suffer the consequences.
I just moved into a new house in a very isolated part of East Texas. It's very quiet, unlike the noisy city, and I really love that the nearest neighbor is 3 miles away. What caught our eye about the house is that it's surrounded by the woods. Whoever constructed the house really loved their privacy since it is about a 5-minute drive into the woods. My daughter and 2-year-old son were a bit creeped out by the house at first since there was some repair done within the first couple of months, but ended up loving it since there was so much to explore in and around the area. My wife just loved that she was able to connect closer to nature and loved what the previous owner did with the backyard garden. The wood line played like our own natural fence, with the path leading to a river a couple 100 feet away. I would spend most of my time in the study on the second floor working on company projects, having a nice view of the backyard. Everything seemed normal until we had a strange incident happen. One evening when I was finishing a project and my wife and son were at the grocery, I noticed my daughter was playing outside in the rain walking to the wood line. We warned our daughter about the river overflowing when there was heavy rain, but she carelessly walked into the woods. Alerted, I sprang up, grabbed my raincoat and ran after her. With the rain and wind picking up, looking around worried, I spotted a white raincoat in the distance heading towards the river. Slipping around in the mud, I started calling her name and demanded her to come back to the house, but she didn't answer or turn around. Again, I called out louder, but still no response. I was a couple yards away when I saw my daughter squatting down, reaching for something in the river. Before I got the chance to warn her, she fell in and was being carried away by the current. Horrified, I began running along the riverbank as I saw her coat bobbing around the water. Being unable to catch up, I jumped in after her, fighting to keep my head above water due to strong current making it impossible to reach my daughter. Fearing the worst at that point, I decided to go and call the police. Struggling through the current, I managed to grab onto a branch. Looking back, I saw my daughter's white coat submerged completely. Pulling myself out, I felt something tug my foot underwater. Kicking away, something started trying to pull me back into the river. Fearing it might have been a heavy log, I began kicking around since it was dragging me back in. Managing to pull myself further and further out of the river, turning around in complete horror when I saw what looked like a pale hand covered in mud holding my foot coming out of the water. Freaking out, yelling, and kicking as hard as I could, only to break the grip of whatever it was. Getting myself up and running as fast as I could home, I busted through the kitchen door and noticed my wife was already home with my son. Frantically looking around for my phone, running around like a madman, my wife shouted, "What the hell happened to you?" Only for me to babble, unstable to spit out the words, breaking down crying on the kitchen floor. My wife helped me up, calming me down again, and asked what happened. Sobbing, I explained to her that I saw our daughter get swept by the current. Just before I could finish explaining, my daughter walked in the kitchen wearing her pink raincoat. Deeply confused, looking at my daughter with wide eyes, my wife told me that our daughter decided to go with her last minute since she wanted candy. A shiver ran down my spine. Unable to shake the feeling, I was certain I saw my daughter get carried away by the river. Stuttering, I asked my wife if our daughter by any chance had a white raincoat. An eerie silence filled the kitchen as she looked at me with a confused expression on her face, only to reply, "No, she doesn't. Why?" When I was around 12, my brother, sister, and I were playing hide and seek when our parents were just out shopping and will be back in about 10 minutes. It was my sister's turn to count. I ran upstairs into my sister's room. In the upstairs, there is a door to the attic. It was closed. I ran into my sister's room and hid in her closet. Well, about 2 minutes into the game, I heard a creaking noise, like a door opening. I thought maybe my brother moved from his hiding spot to the attic. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps coming down the hall towards my sister's room. Then they stopped. After a few seconds, I heard my sister's room door opening. I thought maybe my sister searched the attic and was coming to check her room. But then I thought that would be weird because I didn't hear her open the door and go into the attic. At this point, I was getting scared. The door opened the whole way and someone came into a room. I tried to slow my breathing just in case it was someone or my sister. Then the closet door started to open. I started to see the shadow of a tall man. The door opened the whole way and he stood there. Then his head turned into my direction. He knew I was in there. He then started to walk into the closet. Then I saw his face. He looked about 40 or 50 years old. He then put a finger to his lips and went, "Shh." I screamed. Surprisingly, I was able to run past him before he could catch me. I ran downstairs and saw my brother and sister looking for me. I told them to run outside and call the police. They didn't question me and ran outside. My brother pulled out his phone and called the police. The police arrived about 3 minutes later. The man must have already ran away because when the cops got there, they found no one. We moved about a week later. Just telling this story 13 years later sends shivers down my spine. It has been some time since my last post. Today I relay another true tale of my past to you. When I was very young, I lived up in the densely forested mountains of the Northwest. In those days, my parents still lived together and I saw my sisters frequently. There were many adventures we had up in those mountains. I recall many hikes, making mud pies, and many deer. My father is a craftsman by trade, a real jack of all trades. At the time, we were planning to build a treehouse, but it was never developed beyond the main platform. We had several picnics up on the platform. I do recall one night climbing up there by myself. It was a summer night, just before sunset. I wanted to watch the stars, as I was fascinated by constellations. As the sun sank below the distant peaks, the first stars came to life, and then the rest followed. It was truly a sight to behold. I sat out there for hours watching the stars drift slowly across the night sky. I was about to head down for the evening when I heard strange sounds in the wood. I strained my eyes to see into the shaded brush between the trees. There was movement. It was slow moving, but it moved towards me. I could also hear a strange sound, like a sort of shooshing rattle. All of the hairs on my body stood at attention when I saw a creature. It was a lanky thing, crawling on all fours, its limbs bent in unnatural ways as if it had no bones. It had wild and unkempt hair all over its body. Most terrifyingly, it had massive, shimmering eyes that scanned the area. I sat wide-eyed and shaking at this crawling thing. A light came on in the house, and the thing was practically pulled back into the woods. At that point, I immediately ran back inside. I no longer live up in those mountains. Many good memories came from those days, but I will never forget what lurks in the woods after dark. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was on my way back from a long drop-off. Being a truck driver, I got pretty used to the dark and lonely roads. It doesn't mean I was always comfortable in those positions. In fact, I always had some type of eerie feeling when it came to these long night drives. I've seen an exit for a rest stop in 1 mile, and I decided to take it. I'm not one to usually take a break while driving, but I was feeling more tired than normal. I followed the signs for the rest stop until I was in the parking area. I then turned my truck off and sat back for a moment. It was snowing and pretty cold, so I knew I wasn't going to be taking any kind of power nap. After a few more minutes, I figured I'd just use the restroom and get some caffeine in me. So I hopped out of my truck and headed towards the men's room. In the distance, I could see a bench outside of the little restroom building, but I don't think it was the bench that caught my eye. As I moved closer, I saw what appeared to be a person sitting on the bench. Once I moved past the person, I saw that they were bundled up in a winter jacket and beanie with their face buried downward into the jacket. By the look and style of clothes, I assumed it was a man. It was odd, but my first thought was that it was a father waiting for his kid or something. So I continued on with my business and entered the men's room. Did what I needed to do, but I also realized nobody else was in here, just me. So whoever that person is waiting on must be a girl. I finished up and left. As I walked past this mysterious person, I jokingly said, women always keep you waiting, right? I didn't get any type of response back. I go back to my truck and sat there for a little bit more. I swear, 15 more minutes went by and that person still hadn't moved. It was starting to bother me. So I got back out of my truck and headed back towards the bench. I stood before the person and this time asked if everything was okay. Once again, complete silence. As I moved in closer, I stopped instantly at what I noticed. In the snow was red drips of blood. I also saw a lot more blood had soaked into the person's jacket. I was torn between just getting the hell out of there or finding out what was going on. For some reason, I decided to proceed with investigating. I asked again if the person was okay or needed help, knowing damn well I wasn't going to get a response. Slowly and carefully, I put my hand on the person's beanie, their head still buried downwards in the jacket. I kneeled down as I lifted the person's head up a bit. As I lifted it high enough to see a face, I nearly tripped backwards. It was definitely a man, but he was no longer alive. He was murdered. There was a long cut in his throat. It literally went from one ear to the other. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. All I could think to do was run back to my truck. The whole time I thought I was being watched. But I made it back and I immediately called the police. I explained everything that happened. They said they were sending help right away, but that I needed to stay for further information. All I wanted to do was get the hell out of there. After processing what I just witnessed, I started getting paranoid. I don't know what was scarier, discovering a dead body or having to wait around knowing he was murdered, which means the killer could still be anywhere, maybe even watching me. It felt like forever, but the police finally arrived, and after a lot of questioning, I was free to go. I don't know if the killer was ever found, but the memory still haunts me to this day.